Hi, Year 12. So people in my class have asked for a brief video on memory and how it's represented in 1984 and what it's got to do with the human experience, both at an individual and collective level. Just to explain this video, this is just a launch pad. It's some notes that I have made from some readings that I have done. It's not going to be the complete answer. It's just something that you can get your teeth into and take it down a myriad of paths. But before we can do that, I think it's really important for you to actually understand what memory is and how it shapes us as individuals and how it can shape the collective as well, and what it means for experience, because there are people who would tell you that our memory is what makes up our identity, which is heavily connected to the human experience. So before I launch into 1984, I've actually asked my husband, Mark, to come along and help record this video, because he's currently studying psychology at university and has been exploring memory in his studies. So I thought he could give us a brief understanding of what memory is and how it shapes us before we launch into how it's represented in 1984. So welcome, Mark.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. So I'll just talk very briefly about memory. Psychologists study memory. It's a major part of ongoing research. And really, it's a big mystery. How does it work? How can we influence it? But at any one time, us as individuals are the sum total of all of our memories. And you'll probably know that there's two different kinds of memory. There's long-term and short-term memories. Short-term memory, we know that we can hear a bit of data or a phone number and remember it for maybe a day or so, but then it disappears. But we might remember a meal that we had 25 years ago, or when we were 5 years old, or something that we got for Christmas or a birthday. And that's part of the mystery. What forms and shapes those memories? And everything that we see and do, we are not seeing the event or the object as it really is. We're seeing it as we interpret it. And that's why two people can see the same thing or experience the same experience, yet have two completely different memories of it. Children that go to school that meet again later in life, they'll reminisce on things that happened at school that may never have happened. They've created false memories, and the brain has just worked that way. You can imagine memory, think of memory like a library. You've got conscious memory and subconscious memory. And if you go into a library, all the books on the desk, that's your conscious memory. That's stuff that you can pull straight away, that's always there, almost like your short-term memory. But if you need to go deeper and find some more information that might be stored away, the librarian has to go into the back and start sifting through books. And that's why you might be trying to remember something, trying to remember a line from a movie or a lyric from a song or the colour of a car that you saw some time ago, and you'll struggle trying to remember it, and all of a sudden in the middle of the night, or when you're not thinking of it at all, it'll all of a sudden pop into your head. And that's part of the mystery about memory. We really don't know how it works. We are thankful that it does work, but it's very interesting, and it's the way that it actually does shape our lives and how we interpret the world around us.
How does it shape our lives? Like, how does it form our identity?
Well, it'll influence our decisions. So we might see something, and especially, I guess, in the modern age when we're exposed to so much more information than we were a generation or two generations ago, where we're exposed to something in the order of 20,000 times more information now than we were. So all of that goes in, all of that data flows into our I guess our conscious, whether it's through our eyes or through our ears or through our our touch, smell, hearing. All of our senses take that information in, and then we need to interpret that. Most of that interpretation happens subconsciously or unconsciously. We don't actively think. We see something and we decide that I need to think about that in this particular way. We will see something that will form a reaction, and that reaction is based on what we've learned in the past and how we've lived our lives up until that point. And that's how parents can influence children, and even adults can be influenced by things that they see, and it'll trigger memories from a long time ago, and they'll develop an appropriate response, appropriate to them and how they would react to a specific trigger.
How does it work in terms of the collective memory? So, as an example, the collective memory of Anzac or the collective memory of the Holocaust, where as a collective, as a society, we remember it even though we're born after those dates, and yet it still shapes who we are.
Well, that comes into, I guess, a societal conscience. And, you know, a lot of that comes back to, say, the Constitution, the way we live our lives. And we often talk about, you know, the Australian way and being Australian, and it has a very specific a context and style, and you know, anywhere you travel in the world, you always come across anecdotes and people talking about, that's typical of an Australian, because we have a specific way we do things, and that stems from the way that the country was born. One of the few or only countries that it was ever born out of from convicts as a penal colony. And that entire battler type psyche has just developed over time. So when a major event, and certainly the Anzac tradition or the Anzac memory in World War I was an extremely formative event in Australian history. It was only 14 years after we formed as a federation. And so it was one of the most pivotal events that could have happened in such a young country. And that has permeated, and it remains part of who we are, as in we'll get in, we'll have a go, we'll do our best, and we'll try. And that all forms part of that memory.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now year 12, what we'll do now is have a look at how all of that fits into 1984 and what it means for us in our exploration of memory in 1984 for both the individual and the collective human experience. So let's start with the very first line of the novel. I know we've talked about this in class in terms of structure and how Orwell agitates the reader from the very beginning, because we're launched very quickly out of the primary world into the secondary world. The secondary world being the world of the text. So he very quickly gets us into this literary world that jars with us, because it's not normal for us at this point. And so it says, it was a bright, cold day in April. So that's our primary world. That's something that we're familiar with, although there's that juxtaposition between bright and cold. And of course, this is set in London. So, even the weather is not quite right. It's not what we're expecting. But there was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. And you can probably hear my clock chiming in the background on perfect timing. It's not going to strike 13 though. So straight away it jars, and we've talked about that in class. But what we've also got here at the very beginning of the novel, we're being told that time itself is being manipulated and mutated. And in terms of memory, that becomes an important thing, because arguably we could say time's being controlled, or time's being manipulated for control of something. This is a time contextually where trade unions were arising, and people were fighting for more structured work days and unified work days, and the 8-hour work day instead of having to work all hours of the day. And so by having it strike 13, we can go off on a completely different tangent and talk about the control of workers and shifting away from that trade union movement and human rights and rights about workplace agreements and stuff. But here we can talk about it in terms of memory and what it means if time is manipulated and mutated in terms of our memory. Time is quite significant in 1984, and it's definitely a motif of the novel, and it's something that you can explore in a variety of different ways in terms of ideas and values. And constantly the whole idea of manipulation of time is there. And what we've got is not just from the beginning with the clock striking 13, but Winston very early on when he's writing in his diary says that he's not sure with any certainty that this was 1984. And then he just elaborates on this about just when is it? So we have a big question of when. The novel is certainly called 1984. We've got the idea that we've been launched forward to this year of 1984, and yet it creates doubt. And you know, you could talk about that as a structural element. It makes us doubt the narrator, just as Winston is doubting everything around him, and how that motif of manipulation of time then works with that uncertainty, that unorthodoxy, the questioning of reality, and the questioning of memory. And so later in the novel, when O'Brien and Winston are it's before Room 101, but it's when Winston is being tortured. And Brian says, does the past exist concretely in space? Is there somewhere or other a place, a world of solid objects where the past is still happening? And then later he asks, where does the past exist, if at all? And Winston replies, in records. It is written down. And O'Brien, in records? And Winston replies, in the mind, in human memories. And then O'Brien replies, in memory. Very well then, we, the party, control all records, and we control all memories. Then we control the past, do we not? And Winston and then questions, but how can you stop people remembering things? It is involuntary. It is outside oneself. How can you control memory? You have not controlled mine. And O'Brien eventually says to Winston, reality is not external. And so here we've got history then. History and time become completely inseparable from memory. Now, don't forget, we've got Winston taking taking articles from the Times, taking things from history and popping them into the memory holes. And as soon as it goes into the memory holes, it ceases to exist. And so what you have here is this whole questioning of can we separate memory from history, and what does that mean? So I'm actually going to stop this one here and then go into another video and explore this in more detail for you.